right. Excuse me. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about a little bit of the Heisman watch. We got into the Big 12, broke down a dark horse and the top five players that I'm watching most closely for the Heisman in that conference. But now let's get into some Wednesday what ifs. There's so much happening across the country and so many things going into this season that are pretty much unknown. So let's get into some of the questions that I have. If this happens, what happens because of it? And the biggest one I have is, what happens if Notre Dame goes undefeated? As we all know, Notre Dame is a team that has a running joke that they never really play anybody. And the vast majority of the time, that is not true. This year, it might be, to be totally honest with you. They do still have some big-time games. They do have A&M, Florida State, Louisville, USC. But when you look at this schedule, comparative to some other ones around the country, especially, and even former Notre Dame ones, it's relatively easy. Let's just be totally honest. I've been on record saying anything 11-1 or maybe 10-2, depending on where those losses come, should keep them out of the playoff. I'll just be totally honest. Anything 9-3 or below definitely should not make them in. But it'll be really interesting to watch this develop. But the reality is, I think there's going to be a very interesting conversation had if they do go undefeated. First of all, everyone's going to say that they didn't play anyone. I fully understand that argument. It won't necessarily be the case because going undefeated against pretty much any schedule is really, really tough regardless. But the reality is there's going to be some things happening in South Bend that are going to be pretty special. And it all starts, frankly, with Marcus Freeman. This guy is a very, very special person coming up on this year. I think when we look at what happened a couple of years ago with Brian Kelly leaving for the LSU job and everything kind of happening around that, it felt like Notre Dame fans were not angry, not necessarily totally fine with the situation, but it felt like they weren't quite as angry as some other fan bases might be if a coach like Brian Kelly decided to leave for LSU. They knew who they had. Marcus Freeman is one of those guys that was just waiting in the wings, ready to go, ready to lead a big-time program, and it's been an interesting first couple of years, not necessarily the most linear path forward for him, but the reality is I think he's building something that is going to be really solid this upcoming year. The defensive side of the ball is just insane, and when you have a defensive-minded coach like Marcus Freeman, you're going to be able to do that for quite some time. So I have no real worries there. Riley Leonard coming in at quarterback is a huge addition. Chris Mitchell at wide receiver. They've done a lot of really good things to set themselves up for this year. And I think if they go undefeated, I think there has to be a conversation of what does the future look like under Notre Dame? Because they obviously, they're not going to be in a conference. At least they haven't necessarily shown any interest in being in a conference going forward. So they're going to still be sitting out there and kind of doing their own thing and just kind of, frankly, rolling into the playoff oh my goodness, every single year. I apologize. I'm all over the place today. But he's one of those guys that I think could make a huge jump where I would probably not have him in the top 10 head coaches in the country right now, but he could easily make the jump into the top 5 depending on what he does this upcoming year, because I have a ton of respect of what he's doing up there at Notre Dame. It's been a little bit of a tough path the first couple of years, but this is a year where a lot of things are on the table for them, going to the playoff, possibly winning one of those playoff games and getting further down the road. So it'll be fascinating to watch. Obviously, they aren't eligible for one of those buys because they're not in a conference, but they still could be that number 5 team or that number 6 team and get a really good draw the first round and then possibly get that ACC or Big 12 champion. So Notre Dame has a very comfortable path, I suppose, to find their way into maybe the semifinals of the playoff, where if you go undefeated, if you go 11-1 in this year, there's going to be some conversations to be had around Notre Dame and around Marcus Freeman as we go into this next era of college football. And I think Notre Dame has a very good situation, frankly, because not that they're guaranteed a spot in the playoff every single year, but not playing in a conference, you have a little bit more of an ability to put together a schedule that is a little bit more favorable, let's just put it that way. So it'll be really interesting to watch this develop. It'll definitely be something that I'm watching very closely, but Marcus Freeman could become one of the biggest names in the sport this year. He could become someone that everyone is after whenever they have an opening, and frankly, I don't think he's going anywhere. I think he's very, very happy at Notre Dame and wants to build a winner there, but the reality is if he goes undefeated this year, makes the playoff, maybe even makes a run in the playoff, he's going to be talked about as one of the best coaches in the country, and he probably should be. And Notre Dame is going to be looked at as a team that not only is going to be able to get into the playoff in the next little bit, but maybe just do something that they haven't done in the past and win a national title. So it'll be really, really interesting to watch that develop. Obviously, Marcus Freeman has a ton riding on this year, but it'll be fascinating to watch this team develop because I think they're a really, really good team. They just need a couple of things to follow their direction. But let's get into the second what if, and what if Bama drops that game to Wisconsin? I understand that that's a game that everyone's kind of pointing at and kind of, laughing it off. Bama rolls in, beats Wisconsin, rolls out. That's the end of the day. And I kind of understand that approach, don't get me wrong. But the reality is, when we look at Bama over the last couple of years, there's been something that's been happening. And it's frankly very, very obvious to anyone that's been watching them over the last couple of years. When they leave Bryant-Denny Stadium, things get really interesting. And it almost doesn't matter where they're going. I mean, last year they went down to South Florida, and it was the ugliest game of football I've ever seen a Nick Saban team play. Truly, I've never seen anything quite like that. And a lot of it had to do with the quarterback situation they had going on. But this is something that's continuously happened. They've fought Auburn every single time that they've gone down there the last couple of times. LSU is always going to be a fight. That's kind of a side conversation more than anything else. They struggled against Texas, which was a team that was really good at the time, but Bama was a better team than Texas was in that game. Let's just be totally honest. They probably should have won by 10 to 14 points, but it was a very close game because of that atmosphere and because Bama just doesn't really handle the road very well, or at least they haven't in the last couple of years. So it'll be really interesting to watch that kind of develop, but the reality is they're not necessarily walking into, a library. They're walking into one of those stadiums that can get rocking, and I promise you they will be on that Saturday because they want this one as bad as they've wanted really any win in the past little bit. Obviously, you want that Ohio State win every year. You want that Michigan win. You want that Penn State win. But the reality is, if they beat Bama, if Luke Fickell can find a way to beat Bama in the second week of his second year at Wisconsin, the conversation is going to get really interesting really quickly, not only around Wisconsin, but around Bama, obviously. People are going to be wondering, is Kalen DeBoer the wrong guy? Even though I wouldn't necessarily put that on him because of this loss, I do think there are going to be people that are asking that question. And then it also opens the door for an 8-4 or a 7-5 season for Bama, which is crazy to think about for Bama fans and definitely would really start disaster mode down there in Tuscaloosa. So it's one of those games where you look at it at face value, it's not necessarily that scary, right? It's Alabama against Wisconsin. It should be an Alabama win. And that's tend to be where I'm leaning right now. But the reality is, this is a dangerous team. I think Wisconsin has an ability that some people just aren't really keen on yet or aren't necessarily come around on yet. I think one of the big reasons is Tyler Van Dyke. He didn't necessarily play great football a year ago at Miami, but I do think there is an opening at Wisconsin where he's not going to be asked to do as much in the pass game, and also the secondary he might be going up against in this Bama game might not be as strong as it might be later in the season and down the road because some freshmen are just going to have to play right away. Probably Zabian Brown at one of the cornerback positions, maybe Jalen Mbakwe at one of them, but the reality is he's going to be able to attack some of the younger guys on this team, and if he has success doing that, things get really interesting around this game. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold. Obviously, this is not something that Bama wants. If this does happen to Bama, it's going to be really uncomfortable in Tuscaloosa. And obviously, all of this could change throughout the season. He could still have a fantastic season down there, even losing to Wisconsin. But I don't know. This one would definitely open a lot of people's eyes, and a lot of people would be looking at Kalen DeBoer with a little bit of a side eye after this game if this were to happen. But let's get into the last what if, and frankly, it's the craziest one on on this list, and it's what if Florida State, Miami, and Clemson all miss the ACC championship game? I made a prediction on here that I think Florida State and Clemson will miss it, but that's something that we'll see once I get into my predictions a little bit down the road here. But what if Miami misses it as well? First of all, the ACC would still have a really good title game because there's so many great teams in the ACC this year that will have just really, really fun products to watch on the field, whether you're talking about NC State, Virginia Tech, Louisville, SMU. It'll be a really fun game regardless, so don't worry about that. But we'll have tons of questions around those teams. Clemson will question, is the way that Dabo going about business, is that the right way? Is he making a mistake by doing the things that he's doing? And do they kind of push him to kind of take a step back and rethink the transfer portal way of going about business? So that'll be a really interesting conversation. Florida State will be, frankly, torn to pieces. I'll be totally honest with you. When you talk about what happened last year and the, hubbub that was made, I suppose, around their playoff selection and how they kind of got snubbed. If they come out of the gate and have a really rough season next year and don't make the ACC title, there will be people that will say they were a flash in the pan. There will be people that will say that everything just lined up perfectly for you guys and that was the end of the story and Florida State isn't actually a for real team. I don't think that'll be the case, but I do think that will be a conversation that happens, and there will be a little bit of a worry around Florida State, that's for sure, because you really want to build off what you had last year, and if you don't, then you could be heading into a new conference with some problems. You could be staying in the ACC, just not at the place that you thought you would be. So it'll be really interesting to watch that. And then you have Miami, obviously, where you might just be questioning where Mario Cristobal's time goes from here. Who is the head coach 2 or 3 years down the road if Miami falls on their face this year, because they pushed the chips to the center of the table. I think we all understand that. Getting in Cam Ward, getting in all of the transfers that they brought, they have to compete for at least an ACC title. They have to maybe even at least get there because this talent on this team is just ridiculous. So there will definitely be a conversation where people around Coral Gables are saying, is Mario Cristobal the guy? Is he the right guy for this job? And if he misses the title game, the seat will definitely warm just a little bit. I don't think he'll necessarily be fired by any means, but they'll definitely start having some interesting conversations, I'll say, down in Coral Gables. But overall, it'll be really interesting to watch this develop. I think the ACC is going to be really tough, and they're going to have teams like North Carolina State, like Virginia Tech, that could trip them up along the way and could be in Charlotte at the end of the year. And frankly, it would still be a fantastic game, so I wouldn't necessarily be too upset about that. But also, on top of this, the ACC looking at Clemson and Florida State walking out the door wouldn't quite hurt as much necessarily if they didn't play in the championship game. So that's a little cherry on top for all the ACC fans out there. But the reality is it would be a wild thing if this were to happen, but it definitely could. The ACC is a wild place this upcoming year, so it'll be interesting to see that develop. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for tuning in. Your support means the world to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have so many people doing just incredible work across every single sport you could possibly want. So definitely check it out if you need anything in the world of sports. We totally have you covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.